I've been telling you for a long time that I really wanted to do Watchmen on Versus, and the original idea that I came to you with was The Dark Knight. You pretty much laughed at me.
Yeah, I didn't really get that one.
Yeah.
Except that they're DC and they were in the same area of time.
And obviously, putting Watchmen against The Incredibles was never going to happen. Interesting dichotomy if you ever did that. And there's no Justice League movie yet, so, I mean, there was never going to be a really, straightforward battle for Watchmen. And then I thought about it, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. There is another group that it could face off against, and this was actually requested one day out of the blue, so I told you about it, and you're like, yeah, that could work. And now you have the distinction to try to make it work. I don't think this is going to be, out there as much as, Ghostbusters and Beetlejuice, but still.
The two things that kind of brought it together that made me finally do this one was, number one, it was requested, and number two, just so you would stop trying to match things with Watchmen that made no sense.
Yeah, I just kind of want... Watchmen has had a bad reputation. I know it has a good cult following. It's got a bad reputation otherwise.
It's here now. It's all good.
So finally, after we are officially, as of 2 days ago, a YouTube channel for 2 years. We've been doing Pop for 2 years. This channel's been around since November, but I mean, Pop has been around for 2 years. We finally get this one the weekend that Avengers 2 Age of Ultron comes out. So yeah, we did this on purpose. I know you hate pairing things together.
I kept trying my best during the Age of Ultron review to not talk about the first Avengers too much because I'm just gonna be fucking repeating myself. But
yep,
I think we'll be fine.
So I guess in essence, I think someone that I talked to about this, the one that gave me the idea, kind of said this is like a before and after, basically. Like what happens during the day and what happens in the seedy underbelly at night. So we're going to find out what happened when Marvel battles DC. It is the Avengers against Watchmen. AJ, take it away.
Alright. I'm sure diehard Watchmen fans, if you were to come across this, you're probably pissed off that I'm not reviewing the director's cut, which is basically the novel uncut put to screen, minus the comic book, obviously, because that was its own thing with Gerard Butler.
Was Black Freighter on there, too? That's what you're referring to?
Yeah, I can't remember if it, comes with the director's cut or not, but the director's cut has, the murder of Hollis Mason and all that story that didn't make it into the movie, because it was already so long. But just for the sake of it's the version that I know better, I went with this one. Funny story. I do know somebody that has the director's cut of Watchmen. So I could have if I wanted to, but I didn't. The one person I know of that has the director's cut of Watchmen is my mom.
That's awesome.
So, yes, that's how awesome my mom is.
And to be fair, there's not many people that can say this, but I believe we both can say that we saw this movie theatrically.
A bunch of times.
Yes.
We saw it. I saw it 3 times. I saw it with you, my dad, and what's her face?
But nothing can beat the time of watching it at 2 o'clock in the morning when all sorts of craziness is going down. So that's an experience that I'll never forget.
Yes. So, we're actually, now that we've done all that Watchmen build-up, we're actually going to probably start with the Avengers.
I figured you would. That's the reason I did that, because I knew it was going to be a minute before you started talking about it again.
Okay. Starting with the Avengers. Sorry, I spaced out for a second. Just as we get ready to start, just mine gone.
Wrong superhero movie?
Yeah. Okay. So, as I was talking about before in the Age of Ultron review, sorry to have to repeat this. The thing about the Avengers was it was something that we had never seen before. This was a movie that had been built up like no other movie, probably in history.
Yeah.
Where you have all these different superheroes with all their different fan bases and all their different followings, having their own stories and their own movies, and their own series even. They have their own sequels. And we're finally getting this big movie that puts all of them in the same movie against one villain. Who happens to be the brother of one of them. Adopted brother, as he is quickly keen to tell us once the matters are put forth. After the event, it's basically, if it's a direct follow-up to any of the movies prior to it, it's Thor. And I think if you look at the actual official Marvel timeline, that's also the way it lines up, so it makes sense to say that. We start off, and obviously we have the Tesseract that has been this MacGuffin through the entire series. Like, its importance was really brought to our attention in Captain America. And then it was the big build up to the Avengers was the post-credit scene of the first Thor, where we see that Stellan Skarsgård's character is under the control of Loki and has found the box. And then once it's in Loki's possession, they have to finally assemble the Avengers. After the act was supposedly, they said, you know what, never mind, fuck that. Nick Fury has to keep going to talk to Powers Booth's silhouette about that. But eventually, the Avengers come together. But the interesting thing that they do is, this assembly isn't exactly, I know it's so fucking cheesy, I keep using assembly, I'm sorry, but, it takes a while for them to come together because naturally, it's not as easy as call up the Avengers, here they are. Some of them don't seem to know that they're on the same team. Obviously, there's the, Thor has his own things to sort out with Loki, so we have to kind of get Thor in the mind frame that there are bigger things at stake here. And Tony's whole thing about I don't play well with others. We have all these different conflicts going into this. They have to go out and find Banner because obviously he has to go out into God knows where. So he doesn't kill everybody. And the movies all manage to converge in this one thing, but this gigantic, epic experience of a movie. That was just... What was its box office even? Does anybody even know anymore? It's not something I pay attention to, but it's usually a big deal when a movie takes over, even though we have... With the adjustments with prices and everything, obviously it's much easier done now than it was years ago, but still, it's usually a big deal when a movie is this gigantic. It's for a reason. And all of this was building up to this one movie, which means Joss Whedon had a lot on his shoulders, because there was, I remember it was thrown around a long time who was going to be in charge of this. Favreau had it for a while, until he eventually just dropped out and became a producer on it. And I wasn't really... I'm not a TV person, so I wasn't really familiar with Whedon prior to this. I just know that nerds everywhere exploded when they learned he was going to be the writer and director. The sole writer, too. So this was a gigantic job. It's not very often you see a movie of a big size have the same writer-director, unless it's like a Christopher Nolan movie, where it's a sole writer-director. So for a movie this gigantic, it's clear that Joss Whedon has a lot of power, and a lot of people have a lot of faith in him. And he really, really brought that out. It's worth noting that despite the fact it's actually a really neatly put together movie. The pacing is insane. It's a 2.5 hour movie that flies by. And despite the fact that it's this big monster thing we've been waiting for, and it's this gigantic, epic battle, it's really cleanly split up into 3 parts. We have the first part, which is the them coming together and sorting out their conflicts and kind of getting to know each other and comfortable with each other and all that. Wisecracks abound. My personal favorite being when, because of his hair, Tony refers to Thor as Point Break. Because he has Bodhi's haircut. And then the second half is when, they're on the, nerds are going to be so pissed off I forgot its goddamn name. It just flew right out of my head. The big battle on the ship that they are holding Loki prisoner on is one giant centerpiece. This battle scene is like a half hour long, and it is this massive, massive scene. And the climax of this scene pretty much takes us right into the climax of the movie, which is our third part. So being split up into these very even 3 parts really gives the movie a structure that really keeps it from being like a big mess if everything is all over the place. Because, as it's been mentioned many times before, the absolute best thing this movie did, there was really one thing that this movie needed to do to where the movie would not be a total disaster. And that's, if you're going to have all these big characters that have all these different followings and all these different backstories in the same movie, you've got to give them all a purpose, and you've got to give them something to do and give them screen time. You can't give somebody the shit end of the stick or this isn't going to work. And somehow he found a way. Everybody gets there's no... And it's not like the focus is on one and then for a long period of time, and then it's on another for a long period of time, and then just kind of does that. It's constantly jumping around, but always stays cohesive. It never feels all over the place, despite having so many different characters in one place that it has to work with. And now, if you're going to do this, you have all these people together, you need a purpose for that. And in this particular movie, that reason is Loki. And for the love of God, Tom Hiddleston in this movie is a thing of beauty. I love this character and I love this performance. He didn't really leave an impression on me in Thor, the first movie, but Loki really, really became a character in this movie. The character he really needed to be to have this status, to be a big enough threat, to be the Avengers' first big enemy. And he really, really sells it. And for the most part, he's kind of... They do it's a very cliche plot now that's really, I'm sure it's been done plenty of times, but I think it started as a trend with The Dark Knight, and then it went into Iron Man 2, and then it went into Skyfall, and then later on into Star Trek Into Darkness, where you have your big villain, and you capture him in a big action centerpiece, and then you keep him in prison, and then he gets to do big monologues and taunt everybody, and then he gets to escape and break out for the climax. That is just the formula now for these movies. But it's a formula that works. And it works really well here. Though it is... I've got... Age of Ultron obviously didn't take that route, so we can't blame it for always going that route. I think it's... I don't think we've seen it since Star Trek Into Darkness, so maybe we're good on that not being a cliche anymore, but all the movies it happened in were great to decent, so yeah, there's not a whole lot to complain about. And I love, who was it? It was Banner that was trying to describe Loki, where when he walks by when they're escorting him into the ship, and Banner describes him as, his brain is a bag full of cats. I'm not quite positive 100% what that means, but you kind of get the gist of what he is. I think the line right after that is you can smell the insanity on him or something. You can smell the crazy on him. And he just adds he just has such a one, like I was talking about earlier, the Marvel villains are known for not really being that great. I have a soft spot for Jeff Bridges, of course, but apart from that, the Marvel villains haven't really been, exactly up to par with what they're dealing with on the hero side, which is not good. That's why, I think that's why something like Batman is so successful, because everybody knows Batman, but everybody also knows, Batman's main villains just as well. You can't really say that in regards to a lot of Marvel villains, but what Loki brings to this story really, really brings a center to it, and really... He's the whole purpose that this is happening, apart from the alien army that's coming through a wormhole, obviously, but... and that personality that he has, obviously, that comes through a lot with the Thor scenes. I always loved, when they're fighting, they're kind of having a verbal back and forth, And then Iron Man comes in. Just as he comes in, Thor is looking at Loki and says, "Now you listen to me, brother." And Iron Man comes by and completely knocks Thor out of the shot. And Loki is standing there by himself around nothing and just says, "I'm listening." I always love that delivery. And the great... Yeah. Okay. I guess we throw out there real quick that there is a scene in this movie where Captain America kind of somewhat compares Loki to Hitler. We might just overlook that. It's not... Yeah, it's not as direct as that, obviously, and I'm sure something obviously, since this movie was so big, it was something a lot of people wanted to raise Cain about when it came out. There was that, and then there was the moment that's really funny, and it's really Chris Hemsworth's delivery of it is really what sells it, where he's trying to be defensive of Loki, and say, like, he's my brother, and then they say, well, he's responsible for the deaths of thousands of people, and immediately Thor changes it to, well, he's adopted. And I remember there was a lot of outrage over that line, because I guess adopted kids started crying or some bullshit. Oh, fuck adopted kids, who cares about them? Yes, all of this stuff I'm talking about really needed to work in order for this movie to work. And this was a movie that really, everything going into it was positive, because the movies all did really well. All the fans loved the movies. The movies actually turned out good, the individual movies. Like Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk, Thor, and Captain America all turned out really... Captain America kind of had to grow on me. I didn't really care for it the first time I saw it, but I've seen it a couple more times now. And yeah, it's a really good series leading up to this. So it would have, like, even if they weren't leading up to this, that would have been... Just those four by themselves, like, if it didn't go any farther than that, would have been a nice little, incomplete, obviously, but still, they would have served really nicely. They work really well by themselves and lined up against each other. And it would have been catastrophic if this movie failed. And it really could have. I think like, right up, like, even, bringing in Joss Whedon and stuff like that, if I remember correctly, people were still worried about, because big budget movies and TV is an uneven balance. And this was kind of his first really, really, really big thing. So it was right up until, like, the movie came out, I think, that people were worried about it. I'm sure you had your diehard fans who were absolutely confident it was going to be the greatest thing ever, but still, there was always going to be that doubt. When you have something this big... It's actually quite miraculous that it exists and it works. It really is. And you have this, like I was talking about before, a lot of people didn't think that the threat was big enough because, you need something huge if you're going to bring the Avengers together. I don't know, I think this is a pretty big fucking threat. Aliens opening up the Earth and coming in through a wormhole and wiping everything out. The giant... okay, I kind of get this. I know a lot of people complained that the ending battle in New York looks a lot like a Transformers movie. I can see where they're coming from, but at the same time, Transformers is very loud and cutty and all kinds of shit. The Transformers movies have some really cool stuff in them. Let's not... As far as, like, the battle scenes and stuff like that, the effects and stuff like that, you can't deny that, as bad as you think those movies are, but when you look at those, half the time you can't tell what's going on. And when you look at something like the Avengers, you have the shot, like I said, they kind of redid it for the opening of Age of Ultron, but it happened here also, where it's like one long take where we see all of them individually in action, and it just goes from one person to the other, and it's just one shot seamlessly of all of them battling at the same time. And you have not one, but two iconic shots that reveal the Avengers to you. There's the one at the very end, the Loki point of view shot when they're about to capture him, where Hawkeye's got the bow in his face and they're all standing there like, yeah, motherfucker. And then there is the other one that will never get old. Like, we talk about the movie as a whole, of course, but you think about the fact that not only is it just the movie itself, but this whole series, this whole build-up, this whole thing all the setups, all the post-credit scenes, all building to this big thing that may or may not happen, and then finally we have this miraculous movie, and everything's great. We have this whole thing. Everything is put together. Everything is awesome. You could say, legitimately, that all of this built up to one thing, and one thing only. And that was the shot in New York when they all come down, and they're standing in the circle, and the camera circles around. That shot is where we really came to the point that where these movies were leading. This one shot is what we were looking for this whole time. And it's there in all of its gloriousness. It's a really perfect shot, and it's practically... The movie's only 3 years old, and the shot's already practically iconic. It's certainly gonna be, down the line. And it's just... Yeah, it's still, like, when you think about it, and you think everything that's gone into... I know people can be quick to dismiss them because, like, they're comic book movies, who gives a fuck? That the Avengers exists is an amazing thing. that they've been able to build this universe, and they're still building off of it now. And that we've actually done this twice over now, having gotten to the Age of Ultron now. It's insane. And of course, there's always, the Heart of S.H.I.E.L.D. Coulson is in here, of course, and his untimely demise, which is okay now because the show brought him back to life. The show has a whole... The first season has... I haven't gotten to the second season yet, but the first season has a whole subplot that shows us exactly, like, the chain of events from where Coulson was stabbed by Loki to when he was taken somewhere and now he's back to life. And I love just how this battle works, how it not only is it just like a big action scene that's often been compared to Transformers, but it is this... The rest of the series following the Avengers, especially in Iron Man 3, it's basically... I don't know... I thought it was kind of touchy to say this, but there's really no other way to compare it. Basically, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the battle at the end of the Avengers is the Marvel equivalent of 9/11, basically. Yeah. Because when you watch the rest of the movies, it's treated as this big, devastating event that happened in New York. And they just refer to it as the Battle of New York throughout the series, and it's just got this dooming tone to it every time somebody says it, because it was this big, massive, tragic thing that happened that cost a lot of people's lives and was this just complete destruction of everything. And just how that manages to loom through the... Like, you're just kind of watching it happen, and then the way it kind of looms over the rest of the series really adds something to it. And it's ridiculous, because you watch this and you see them fending everybody off, and everybody is doing something. Everybody is fending aliens off in one way or another. And then you have Tony actually take this nuke and fly it through the wormhole, and then blow everything up, and then come back down just as it closes. And then he almost falls to his death before Hulk catches him. And he's laying there, and we think he's dead. And they do, it's one of my least favorite cliches of all time, but they make it funny by, we're supposed to lay there and think, oh my god, Tony's dead, but of course he's not. And Hulk just screams in his face and wakes him up. And it's ridiculous, because the last time I was watching this movie, I know it's really fucking stupid, I know. But, I'm trying to get a couple of scripts going as of late, and I'm having a bit of trouble. So the other day, I'm watching the Avengers, and Tony has taken a nuke, flown through the wormhole, blown up the ship, fallen back through the wormhole, barely alive, and lands on the ground of New York, and is looking up. And his response is, well, I think that's enough work for today. Maybe we should take tomorrow off. And in that thought, I was thinking, man, what the fuck have I done lately? Tony Stark just flew a nuke through a wormhole. What am I doing with my life? And then I had to go to the fact, wait, I'm watching a fucking comic book movie, but still, it's great. And it's worth noting, once again, I was talking earlier about how a lot of the Marvel movies get a lot of flack because they have so much comedy in them. But the thing you have to think about is just with the tone of these movies, comedy might as well be one of their genres. Like, you have action, you have adventure, you have fantasy, you have sci-fi, and then you have comedy. It's all just kind of one big thing here. It just goes with it. And some of it actually pays off. Like, there's always the comedy bits about Coulson's collection of Captain America cards that Nick Fury ends up using to motivate them, even though he was faking them out. And then you have the moment, I don't know, there's the moment where Tony walks in, and it seems like a really stupid throwaway thing, where he's looking at all the people with all the monitors, and he calls out the guy for playing Galaga. And then that just kind of goes away. And then as the scene ends, the guy looks around to make sure nobody's watching, and then he goes back to playing Galaga, and he actually was. And it's just a throwaway joke. But then you look back and you think on it in retrospect, what you do, like when you play Galaga, is the climax of the movie. That's what it is. It's the same plot, basically. So it was like an Easter egg that Whedon intentionally threw in there. So it's nice. It all pays off in one way or another, even if some of the jokes kind of don't work as well as some others. So yes, it's there was a lot riding on this movie, and there's really a lot of people like to say the Marvel movies run together, and they're just stupid superhero movies, and they're like Transformers movies and all that. But no, there's really not a movie like the Avengers. Even its sequel couldn't live up to it. But yeah, it's definitely its own thing, and that they were able to pull it off, and then it came out so well is just, it's insane. And it has so many scenes that people will remember like forever. For instance, it's the one scene often gets credit, but I like the combination of scenes that serve to take Loki down. There's obviously the moment, the puny god scene that everybody loves, that I personally could watch on a loop 150 times and it wouldn't get old, where he just smashes Loki into the ground and then walks away saying puny god, and then Loki is just kind of moaning ever so slightly to himself, laying in this hole that he's been put into. I also love, right before that, how he ends up in the building when Hawkeye shoots the arrow at him and he catches it, and he's really fucking proud of himself, and then it blows up. I've always thought that combination with the puny god scene together is what makes it work so well. Even if one of them gets a lot more of the credit. Now I'm overly dissecting, so yes, The Avengers is great, is what I'm trying to say. And fantastic. So, following that, we have Watchmen, which is totally different in tone, and came 3 years prior. When DC was really breaking out, because we were right in the middle of Nolan's Batman trilogy. I remember, because I saw The Dark Knight in theaters like fucking 8 times. The Watchmen teaser was the first trailer on it. I could probably tell you every movie that had a trailer that was attached to The Dark Knight, because the only time that's all. Body of Lies is on there. Burn After Reading was on there. But anyway, the interesting thing that Watchmen does here is sets up a totally different thing. It basically wants you to know that it's not just a normal superhero movie. So they went as far as to, well, superhero story, because obviously it's, literally the the graphic novel come to life. So they just decided to set it in an entirely different universe. Now, the very first question you want to raise to Watchmen is, now, a lot of people are very, very critical of Watchmen. A lot of people really don't like it. But a lot of people love it too. So when you go into Watchmen, the first thing you've got to ask yourself is, it really brings an intrigue to the movie too. This isn't a criticism by any means, but what makes Watchmen so interesting is you go into it, and the first question you ask yourself is, what does a movie do with the next 2.5 hours it has to go after it's killed off its most interesting character in the first 10 minutes? where does a movie possibly go for 2.5 more hours after you've killed off the most interesting character in the first scene of the movie? Well, let's talk about it. For starters, this opening 10 minutes of Watchmen is unprecedented. There are two scenes. That's when I was talking about. I haven't talked about them on camera yet, but I've talked about them with people. The great thing you need to do when you're doing particularly superhero movies is where it seems to really stand out. But action movies too, really. It's a lot of people think it might be excessive, but this is what I thought. The Dark Knight did well. The Dark Knight Rises didn't, even though I actually prefer Rises as a movie. If that's your first time hearing me say that, please don't kill me. To have one scene that really, really grabs your attention, and then have a second scene to back it up that also really, really brings your attention, and then you can kind of go into a story before you start, going in and out of action and going into story points. Watchmen kind of takes that approach, because with The Dark Knight, you have the opening heist, followed immediately by the confrontation with the Scarecrow, before we go into a lot of dialogue. Not quite what Watchmen does, but still does it probably better than a lot of movies have. It doesn't start off with two action scenes. It starts off with one really great scene, one really great fight scene. I struggle to say fight scene because it's a fucking beating. It's a one-way fucking beating. But it's a magnificent scene, and it's followed immediately by what is widely considered, anybody that hates this movie will agree. If you absolutely despise Watchmen, you're still saying probably one of the best opening credit sequences of all time is Watchmen's. With the Bob Dylan songs over the... We start off with the very first group of them, and then we go through time, and then we eventually get to the point of we have the current group. And it is this magnificent look over time where we see how they've interacted in this, how this alternate universe is different, and how the Watchmen have changed it. The first one that stands out immediately is apparently a lot of people did not notice this right away when the movie first came out. But the very first thing we see when the opening credits come on, after we zoom in on the smiley face and then the song starts to play and we fade in, it's a guy punching a robber as two people are coming out of a building. And if you look on the walls, there are context clues that tell you that he is taking out the mugger that killed the Waynes, and that is Bruce Wayne's parents standing there who have just been saved. So in this universe, Batman does not exist. Which is a really cool little Easter egg in there. And then we see, stuff like the comedian shot JFK. Dr. Manhattan was the first man on the moon. Just all the different history stuff. And it's this magnificent opening to this movie. So much so that on top of the comedian's death scene, followed by this opening credits scene, you actually start to worry because you don't know how the rest of the movie is going to live up to this. And it goes back and forth because there were those 3 times I saw Watchmen in the theater, and then there were probably like 2 or 3 more times I watched it on DVD when it came out. And then I didn't see it again for a long time, but I always remembered everything about it. I remembered every detail of it. But I never actually watched it, probably since 2009 until recently. And I was concerned about how it would hold up. Because it's one of those movies that just instantly makes you giddy, like, oh my god, this movie exists, it's awesome, and it looks so fucking cool, too. So watching it 6 years later, after the giddiness is worn off, it's interesting, because there are a big criticism I'd always heard about Watchmen that I didn't, say it was wrong, but I would just often brush it off and not really pay attention to it, was that it had moments of greatness that was it was an uneven balance of moments of absolute greatness and moments that just aren't. And having 6 years to let the oh my god, this movie exists, it's amazing wear off. I get that. Because when back then you can tell when scenes are just like, oh, that's kind of stupid, but fucking rock on. Those stupid scenes start to stand out a little more. But let's break it down a little bit. Because it's not like the entire first half of the movie is great and the entire second half is sucks, or the other way around. The greatness keeps popping its head up randomly, and the not so greatness keeps popping its head up randomly. And it's an interesting little mix. Once again, I can't express. This opening scene is just grabbing immediately, and Jeffrey Dean Morgan is insanely fucking good in this. Good God. It's amazing, and I love the callback. I'm assuming I don't think it's been confirmed. I don't even think it's on IMDb's trivia page, but I've just always assumed it. It's an obvious callback to Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder referencing himself because the comedian's door number is 3001, and there's a brief moment there. His first plan of attack is to throw his coffee mug at the door, and it hits the door, and the one breaks off, and for a split second, his door says 300. I don't know if that wasn't. I mean, I don't see why it wasn't intentional, but it's fun to think maybe it wasn't, and it's just that's fucking weird. Because obviously it's famous for the movie. Literally takes the images of the book and puts them to life on screen. That might have been an image in the book. I don't remember. Because that's how close it is. One thing I could never take my mind off of when watching this, because I read the graphic novel right before seeing the movie, and while watching the whole movie, I couldn't help but think about how tedious work in the writing room must have been, because they literally just took. It's like how Rodriguez and Frank Miller didn't even use scripts for Sin City; they just used the books and just read out of them and used them as a script. That might as well have been what they did here, because the dialogue is just lifted directly. Like, everything. Like, exactly. Like, they didn't change really anything as far as the dialogue. That I remember, anyway. And it has a really good start, too. Like, even after the opening credit sequence, it's still got a good role there, because we're immediately introduced to Rorschach, who is a lot of people's favorite character. I'm partial to the comedian, obviously, but a lot of people really, really take to Rorschach. Who is this detective. There's not like he's technically a serial killer, and he's totally out of his mind. He's a complete psychopath, but he's also this. He's a legit detective. He even dresses like one, and it actually feels like you're watching some classic crime story, some classic detective story when you see him, trying to solve this crime of the comedian's death. And how he goes to Dan and talks about all the different things. And this is the point where we don't really know everybody's backstory immediately. We have more backstory on the original ones, more so than we do on them when the movie begins. Like we saw, another thing we didn't mention was the nurse that gets kissed by the female superhero, and we can see the sailor who was originally kissing her just kind of wandering around aimlessly. We know more about them than we do the new ones when it starts, so they have to kind of throw that exposition out at us, and we slowly. I do like the concept, even if it doesn't always work. I do like the concept of how we gradually get their backstories throughout, as each character kind of has their moment of this is what this character's story arc is going to be. In this first scene between Dan and Rorschach, where they're talking and. The exposition is surprisingly smooth, because they're because their pasts tie into what's going on, so they're just kind of throwing random exposition bits out there while also trying to, discuss this mystery that's going on about who killed the comedian. And I thought that scene worked really well, even if some of the Dan Rorschach scenes don't exactly always shine. Because there are moments where, like, Okay. I just need to throw this out there real quick. I have nothing against her. I'm sure she's extremely lovely in real life, and she has shined in roles. She has shown that she has talent. But if there's one person that I had to single out that takes this movie to a level that I'm not particularly fond of, and it may not necessarily be her. It's probably the character and the writing, but Malin Ackerman. When she's on screen in this movie, which is a lot, I'm not particularly interested. And there are a few things, and because it's not just the character in those scenes, but it seems to like wear off on other good characters. Like we've just had this really decent scene between Dan and Rorschach, and then suddenly he goes in to visit Dr. Manhattan and Laurie to further his investigation, and the badness going on in this scene starts to rub off on Rorschach a little bit. That moment where he's the stone cold psychopath. You know, he doesn't even have a goddamn face until they take his mask off. It's just moving constantly, and he's such a mystery. And he's so he's just somebody you do not want to fuck with at all. So he goes to visit Dr. Manhattan and Laurie, and he's talking, and he calls her by her superhero name, and she says, I do have a real name that I go by now, and I have gone by for quite some time now. And Rorschach does the, sorry, Laurie. And it's, where the fuck is this scene going? I know it sounds a little nitpicky when I just say it, but if you remember the scene, I hope you know what I'm talking about. It's not very good. And just the whole, another problem here is that she brings to the story I'm sorry, is the love story with her and Dan. I get, why it's important to the story, I guess. But there are really, really long scenes devoted to it. This movie is 2 hours and 42 minutes, and this is not the director's cut. And I get, they're kind of doing it's hard to tell if they're trying to do the, awkward dating, date friends for a long time kind of thing, or if the writing and the acting is just really stiff and weird and not very good. The moment where I love this, I know I've talked about Patrick Wilson positively before, but I honestly can't tell you what to make of Patrick Wilson in this movie. I have no idea how I feel about Patrick Wilson in this movie. I don't know what the character is and what's the really shitty writing. The scene I'm talking about, obviously, is the scene where they're having dinner, and he's talking about the guy who went around trying to get superheroes to punish him. And it's just his delivery. It's fucking hilarious, but I can't tell if it's supposed to be or if it's just not good stuff here. The way he delivers, he was always following me around too, just saying, punish me, punish me. And I was like, no. And then the moment where she says, whatever happened to him? And he's like, well, he tried that on Rorschach and he dropped him down an elevator shaft. And then they just sit in an awkward silence. I can't tell if they're doing the awkwardness or if the writing just fucking sucks. I can't tell, but these scenes never really worked for me. Even when I was really geeking out over the movie when it first came out, these scenes were not really doing it. And they there are those moments with there's, once again, I don't know what the fuck to do with Dan here. Because I get his character, I totally do. He's the ultimate good guy that wants he's almost like a complete mockery because he's so, everything is, everything must be good and we must do the right thing, he's that guy. But, okay. There are a couple of things that Dan brings to this movie that I'm not particularly a fan of. But like I said, the relationship between he and Malin Ackerman is way dragged out. There are scenes with them that go way too long and often involve awkward nudity, and I'm not talking about her. While we're on this is much later in the movie, but while we're on the subject, we might as well talk about that sex scene. Okay, look, I'm really glad that you brought Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah back into the mainstream. That's great. But that other version that was in Shrek is also really popular. Um, um, I get. I'm not quite sure. Well, I mean, I get. Okay, I know. I understand. Your defense can always be, it was in the novel. Okay, but when I understand, like, if you really, really want to be loyal, why not just take the pages directly out of the comic book and put them on the screen? I get it, but still, some editing could have worked here. Some editing really, really could have done some good here. And this whole sequence, where here's what happens, okay? We're at the point now where Rorschach has been arrested and put in prison. And it gets to a point to where she and Dan have to go get him. But in between Rorschach getting put in prison and them rescuing him, we have these two scenes right here. The one with the burning building and the sex scene. Now, I understand what you're trying to do with their characters. You have to establish the relationship here with these characters. I get it, I do. But these scenes are so long and dragged out that it really does not register with me why you can't just cut out some stuff and go straight from, instead of them going to a burning building and doing shit and then fucking, why don't we just have them go straight to Rorschach? That's like a good 20 minutes that we could have saved. Where we already know that something's happening between these characters. We already know. We already had the aborted sex scene. That would have been enough without them, fucking in the blue light and her orgasming fire out of Archie or whatever the fuck. But, it is what it is, I guess. The point I'm trying to make here is, there's another, before we get into, I have more good things to say. I have a lot more good things to say about Watchmen. But one more big complaint I have, is another one where I understand how it's totally crucial to the story, but I really feel like, the editor should have been working a little harder. I understand the importance. If you're gonna listen to me. I understand the importance. I am totally 100% here with you on how crucial it is to the story. But Osterman's backstory did not have to be that long. Osterman's backstory is very fucking long. And there's really no reason it has to be either. It could have been cut down to about 5 minutes. And you could have gotten all the details in that we needed to know. And I understand. I'm very appreciative that you want to give every superhero its, big backstory so we know exactly what's going on with them. And they're not just some random characters that are here. We know, everything they've been through to get to this point and why they behave the way they do and why they interacted with who they interacted with and how. I get it. But that is a long goddamn scene. And that's really where the movie stops dead. And I am not criticizing Billy Crudup in any way. There's nothing wrong with Billy Crudup's performance. The issue here is this Osterman backstory is so long, and it's being told to us through Dr. Manhattan's voice. And when you're being told a story this long in Dr. Manhattan's voiceover, you're bringing the movie to a dead fucking stop. Because you're really not, you really have to keep people engaged when you got them in a movie this long, and you have a story that's been going along just fine, and you have to just get through this backstory. The way they handle the comedian's backstory is fantastic. Those scenes are amazing. I fucking love the way they handle the comedian's backstory. Because here's what they did. As I said before, the comedian scenes in this movie are the best scenes in the movie. And the movie's 2 hours and 42 minutes. Dude's probably in the movie for 10 minutes. Jeffrey Dean Morgan is probably on screen for 10 minutes. And he's the most memorable character in the movie. And the way they handle his flashback, that soundtrack is getting put to work. That magnificent soundtrack. Where they have this really melancholic funeral for the comedian, where it's raining. It's a cliche, a rainy funeral, of course, but the way it's shot and the way it just looks, everything is fantastic about this scene, and the sound of silence is playing. And everything is really melancholy and sad and tragic. But then we see everybody standing around the casket, and we each get their own little story, their own little interactions with the comedian. And that's how we learn about who his character really was. And we see how much of a horrible, terrible fucking person he was. I remember so many debates. This is 2009, we were still on MySpace. I raised the debate many times about if the comedian is a straight up villain, despite being a superhero. Because, as I was saying, the comedian is on screen maybe 10 minutes. In this 10 minutes, he commits mass murder. There is an attempted rape, which he doesn't quite succeed in, but he does beat the holy shit out of her. We see him assassinate John F. Kennedy, and we see him shoot and kill the Vietnamese woman carrying his baby because she cut his face. So, I don't know. Even though he's a part of this whole superhero team, he seems totally against the idea. Because he just thinks, he's gotten to the point where his namesake comes from the fact that he just thinks the world's a joke now. Like, that's his only way of coping with what the world is now, is to just laugh at it. While he's gunning people down in the streets. Or killing mass amounts of Vietnamese people with a flamethrower. What's great about that is the shift in tone here. Because when it starts, it's such a melancholy funeral and such a tragic event. Especially when we know, when he went to see Matt Frewer, and we learned how he was like, at the end of his urban, he was scared of something, and something was just really fucking with him. And Rorschach tells us the Pagliacci story. But the shift in tone in this funeral, where it starts, and it's this sad event with this, dreariness on it. By the end of this funeral, it's almost like we're saying, good riddance, stay in the ground. And between when this funeral starts and when this funeral ends, the way we were introduced to him through the other characters' point of views totally changes our perception of him from when his funeral starts to when his funeral ends. And I think that's just fucking brilliant. I really love the way that was put together. The prison sequence. I love the prison sequence. It is fantastic. With Danny Woodburn as Big Figure, who goes uncredited, by the way, which is interesting. And the whole fight scene and the breakout and everything like that, and all the scenes where Rorschach without his mask in the interrogation room with I don't like you, you're fat. Yeah. You could call me Walter. Jackie Earle Haley is fantastic in this. And this really shows in these prison scenes. And Big Figure's death scene is a work of art, which I remember coming straight from the novel as well, where we see the door swinging, and we see less and less of it as it goes, and then we hear a flushing toilet and Rorschach comes out, and we just see this puddle of blood flowing out from under the crack in the door, and we don't know what he did to him. It's fantastic. So much goddamn bloody violence in that prison, too. Good God. It's and Dr. Manhattan blowing people up, too, is just... This movie is really, really horrifically graphic in a lot of ways, but that grittiness to it, that's when it really, really hits. Because when it's trying to... Honestly, I was just talking about how the Avengers works because it's so lighthearted and not trying to be too serious. With a movie like Watchmen, when you set up this universe, when you're trying to be light is when it's not working. I think that's why the character of Dan never really worked for me, because he's trying so hard to be the light in this really dark universe and be the person that does right. But he just comes off looking like a parody. Which, is really the whole point, but some of it just, I don't know. There's just the movie's very, very uneven, and because there are those moments where you just can't help but just think, oh god, I wish that wasn't in there. Dan is at it again. The scene that I hate the most in this movie. Okay, everything we've seen Rorschach do in this movie, I understand that Dan and Rorschach are very close now. I mean, Rorschach's not the kind of guy that's like best buddies with you or anything, but they've worked together long enough to where they've got like a partnership, you know, a mutual respect. But we know, because we've seen him in action, that Rorschach is a psychopath, a murdering psychopath. That dude may have been a pedophile that fed a little girl to his dogs and then put her bones in the furnace. Yeah, but still, we saw Rorschach take a meat cleaver to that guy's head over and over and over and over again. So, Rorschach is not exactly more sane. So, having that established, we have this scene where Dan goes off on Rorschach after they've gotten him out of prison, and he calls him a goddamn maniac. And this results in Rorschach putting his head down, and Dan saying, I'm sorry, this is a direct quote, I'm sorry, man, I didn't mean it. And then he has to say that, no, Dan, you're right, I am a psychopath. It's like, what in the fuck is that in there for? I understand, Rorschach understands, you know, what he is. He does. There were other ways to show this. That scene is the worst scene in this movie, and it only lasts for like 30 seconds. At least it's only 30 seconds. That's a good thing. But Jesus, is it memorable for all the wrong reasons? And then there are those Mountain Ackermans at it again. I do like the showdown with Adrian. The climax is great, and really ballsy. How they actually take the... Obviously, this is also a comment toward the book as well, but the fact that Adrian's plane actually goes through, and Rorschach has to be killed in order to keep it from going through, to keep it going through. And we actually see half, like, everybody in the city wiped out, just obliterated. That was really ballsy. And it's great. And you have them fighting this impossible villain. He's the fastest man in the world. He's the smartest man in the world. He is this, you know, ultimate thing. I love the little detail where they're playing, when he's at that little meeting and everybody's following him around. And you hear, Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears as elevator music in the background. I love that detail. So this big thing is going down. Adrian has wiped out everybody, and his whole plan is coming through. All these people are dying, and he's this mad genius who is finally fixing things the way he feels they should be. And it's working, even if it's, you know, absolutely tragic and horrific and catastrophic and terrible. She pulls a gun on him, and just before she shoots him, all she says is, "You're such an asshole." I hate that so much. But it does have a nice follow-up. I do like that moment where he finally makes Dan realize what he's up against. When he, obviously, they talked earlier about the legend about how Adrian says he can catch a bull, but nobody believes him. And he actually catches her bullet. And I love the moment where he's about to retaliate, and Dan says, "Don't you hurt her!" And Adrian's response is just pull the bullet off of his hand and say, "Dan, grow up." You're not gonna fucking stop me. So yes, there are moments in this movie that are absolute pure greatness and pure brilliance. And Snyder really, really made a work of art with it visually. Like, from beginning to end, visually, it's a work of art. Even if there are long strands of the movie where some stuff is really stupid or some stuff is really stretched out longer than it should be and is really dragging the movie down and really fucking the pace off. The pacing is really bad with this movie. Because some of it's really great, and then it'll have these long stretches of not, and then just go back and forth. And it really feels its length, which is not something you want a movie that's 2 hours and 42 minutes to do. Even when it's not even the director's cut. How many times do I have to say that? But, you know, and it really, really fits his style. Like with Man of Steel, it was kind of like, oh, Zack Snyder, please stop being so Zack Snyder-y. But with Watchmen, it works. It really works. His style really, really fits. Like this, the slow-mo is not bothersome. It actually really, really works, especially in the opening scene. With the comedian getting thrown across the room and then out the window. The slow-mo really, really works well in this world. It's really just the storytelling where there are times where it needs to really pick itself up and it can't. So, yeah, it really, really reaches its limits of greatness, but just as equally, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be cut down and better. So, Watchmen's an interesting experience, for sure. But those moments of greatness are really, really high, so it's really hard to judge. So if you want consistency, definitely go for the Avengers. But if you want something that, you know, actually tries to be thought-provoking in a way and has, you know, will go in directions you don't expect it to, and just be like really, because the Avengers is really lacking in the visual aspect. Like I said, there's a couple of really great shots, but Watchmen throughout is just, you know, a wonder for the eyes, even if, you know, the story itself isn't living up to it. So yeah, it's a tough call.
So that's what you're going to do is basically say that. Okay, haven't done that in a while.
Okay. If I have to pick one right now, right at this very instant off the top of my head, I'd say the Avengers. But it just depends on your mood, really. You go really, really happy and jovial, or you go the complete fucking opposite.
Yep.
Alright. Wow, that went a long time.
Yeah, that was the longest versus we've done in a long time. Next week, your Cryptic Comedy's Crime Boss.
Yes.
And every week we get a little bit closer to that epic versus that's going to be on the anniversary of this segment. So stay tuned for that one. That's going to be fun. Every day we seem to get a new versus ideas anyway, so it seems like this segment's never going to go away to review every single movie that you own at this rate. So that being said, thank you guys and girls out there for watching, and this concludes the 2-year anniversary of Pop Weekend here, and hopefully you enjoyed all the content we had for you guys, and that's pretty much all we have for today. So AJ, any parting words?
That's it.